The history of Myanmar covers the period from the time of first known human settlements 13,000 years ago to the present day. The earliest inhabitants of recorded history were a Tibeto-Burman-speaking people who established the Pyay city-states ranged as far south as Pyay and adopted Theravada Buddhism. Another group, the Bamar people, entered the upper Irrawaddy Valley in the early 9th century. They went on to establish the Pagan Kingdom, the first ever unification of the Irrawaddy Valley and its periphery. The Burmese language and Bamar culture slowly came to replace Pyay norms during this period. After the First Mongol invasion of Burma in 1287, several small kingdoms, of which the Kingdom of Ava, the Hanthawaddy Kingdom, the Kingdom of Mrauk U and the Shan States were principal powers, came to dominate the landscape, replete with ever-shifting alliances and constant wars. In the second half of the 16th century, the Toungoo dynasty reunified the country, and founded the largest empire in the history of Southeast Asia for a brief period. Later Toungoo kings instituted several key administrative and economic reforms that gave rise to a smaller, more peaceful and prosperous kingdom in the 17th and early 18th centuries. In the second half of the 18th century, the Konbaung dynasty restored the kingdom, and continued the Toungoo reforms that increased central rule in peripheral regions and produced one of the most literate states in Asia. The dynasty also went to war with all its neighbors. The Anglo-Burmese Wars eventually led to British colonial rule. British rule brought several enduring social, economic, cultural and administrative changes that completely transformed the once agrarian society. British rule highlighted outgroup differences among the country's myriad ethnic groups. Since independence in 1948, the country has been in one of the longest-running civil wars involving insurgent groups representing political and ethnic minority groups and successive central governments. The country was under military rule under various guises from 1962 to 2010, and in the process has become one of the least developed nations in the world. Early history. Prehistory. The earliest archaeological evidence suggests that cultures existed in Burma as early as 11,000 BCE. Most indications of early settlement have been found in the central dry zone, where scattered sites appear in close proximity to the Irrawaddy River. The Onythian, Burma's Stone Age, existed at a time thought to parallel the Lower and Middle Paleolithic in Europe. The Neolithic or New Stone Age, when plants and animals were first domesticated and polished stone tools appeared, is evidenced in Burma by 3 caves located near Toungoo at the edge of the Shan Plateau that are dated to 10,000 to 6,000 BC. About 1500 BCE, people in the region were turning copper into bronze, growing rice, and domesticating chickens and pigs. They were among the first people in the world to do so. By 500 BCE, iron-working settlements emerged in an area south of present-day Mandalay. Bronze-decorated coffins and burial sites filled with earthenware remains have been excavated. Archaeological evidence at Salmon Valley south of Mandalay suggests rice-growing settlements that traded with China between 500 BC and 200 CE. During the Iron Age, archaeological evidence also out of Salmon Valley revealed changes in infant burial practices that were greatly influenced by India. These changes include burying infants in jars in which their size depict their family status. Pyay city-states. The Pyay entered the Irrawaddy Valley from present-day Yunnan, circa 2nd century BCE, and went on to found city-states throughout the Irrawaddy Valley. The original home of the Pyay is reconstructed to be Qinghai Lake in present-day Qinghai in Gansu. The Pyay were the earliest inhabitants of Burma of whom records are extant. During this period, Burma was part of an overland trade route from China to India. Trade with India brought Buddhism from South India. By the 4th century, many in the Irrawaddy Valley had converted to Buddhism. Of the many city-states, the largest and most important was the Sri Kshetra Kingdom southeast of modern Pyay, also thought to once be the capital city. In March 638, the Pyay of Sri Kshetra launched a new calendar that later became the Burmese calendar. 8th century Chinese records identify 18 Pyay states throughout the Irrawaddy Valley, and describe the Pyay as a humane and peaceful people to whom war was virtually unknown and who wore silk cotton instead of actually silk so that they would not have to kill silkworms. The Chinese records also report that the Pyay knew how to make astronomical calculations, and that many Pyay boys entered the monastic life at 7 to the age of 20. It was a long-lasting civilization that lasted nearly a millennium to the early 9th century until a new group of swift horsemen from the north, the Bamars, entered the upper Irrawaddy Valley. In the early 9th century, the Pu city-states of Upper Burma came under constant attacks by Nanzhao. In 832, the Nanzhao sacked Halingyi, which had overtaken Prom as the chief Pu city-state and informal capital. Archaeologists interpret early Chinese texts detailing the plundering of Halingyi in 832 to detail the capturing of 3,000 Pu prisoners, later becoming Nanzhao slaves at Kuan Myung. While Pu settlements remained in Upper Burma until the advent of the Pagan Empire in the mid-11th century, the Pu gradually were absorbed into the expanding Burman Kingdom of Pagan in the next 4 centuries. The Pu language still existed until the late 12th century. By the 13th century, the Pu had assumed Bamar ethnicity. The history/legends of the Pu were also incorporated to those of the Bamars. Mon kingdoms. According to the colonial era scholarship, as early as the 6th century, another people called the Mon began to enter the present-day Lower Burma from the Mon kingdoms of Harapan Jaya and Irrawaddy in modern-day Thailand. By the mid-9th century, the Mon had founded at least 2 small kingdoms centered around Bago and Thatin. The earliest external reference to a Mon kingdom in Lower Burma was in 844 to 848 by Arab geographers. But recent research shows that there is no evidence to support colonial period conjectures that a Mon-speaking polity existed in Lower Burma until the late 13th century, and the first recorded claim that the Kingdom of Thatin existed came only in 1479. Pagan dynasty. Early Pagan. The Burmans who had come down with the early 9th Nanzhao raids of the Pu states remained in Upper Burma. In the mid to late 9th century, Pagan was founded as a fortified settlement along a strategic location on the Irrawaddy near the confluence of the Irrawaddy and its main tributary the Chindwan River. It may have been designed to help the Nanzhao pacify the surrounding countryside. Over the next 200 years, the small principality gradually grew to include its immediate surrounding areas, to about 200 miles north to south and 80 miles from east to west by Irrawaddy's accession in 1044. Pagan Empire. Over the next 30 years, Irrawaddy founded the Pagan Kingdom, unifying for the first time the regions that would later constitute the modern-day Burma. Irrawaddy's successors by the late 12th century had extended their influence farther south into the Upper Malay Peninsula, at least to the Salween River in the east, below the current China border in the farther north, and to the west, northern Arakan and the Chin Hills. The Burmese chronicles claim pagan suzerainty over the entire Chao Phraya Valley, and the Thai chronicles include the lower Malay Peninsula down to the Strait of Malacca to Pagan's realm. By the early 12th century, Pagan had emerged as a major power alongside the Khmer Empire in Southeast Asia, recognized by Song China and the Chola dynasty of India. Well into the mid-13th century, most of mainland Southeast Asia was under some degree of control of either the Pagan Empire or the Khmer Empire. Irrawaddy also implemented a series of key social, religious and economic reforms that would have a lasting impact in Burmese history. His social and religious reforms later developed into the modern-day culture of Burma. The most important development was the introduction of Theravada Buddhism to Upper Burma after Pagan's conquest of the Thatin Kingdom in 1057. Supported by royal patronage, the Buddhist school gradually spread to the village level in the next 3 centuries, although Vajrayana Buddhist, Mahayana, Hindu, and animism remained heavily entrenched at all social strata. Pagan's economy was primarily based on the Kyoks agricultural basin northeast of the capital, and Minbu, south of Bagan, where the Bamars had built a large number of new weirs and diversionary canals. It also benefited from external trade through its coastal ports. The wealth of the kingdom was devoted to building over 10,000 Buddhist temples in the pagan capital zone between 11th and 13th centuries. The wealthy donated tax-free land to religious authorities. The Burmese language and culture gradually became dominant in the upper Irrawaddy Valley, eclipsing the Pu and Pali norms by the late 12th century. By then, the Bamar leadership of the kingdom was unquestioned. The Pu had largely assumed the Bamar ethnicity in Upper Burma. The Burmese language, once an alien tongue, was now the lingua franca of the kingdom. The kingdom went into decline in the 13th century as the continuous growth of tax-free religious wealth. By the 1280s, 2/3 of Upper Burma's cultivable land had been alienated to the religion, affected the crown's ability to retain the loyalty of courtiers and military servicemen. This ushered in a vicious circle of internal disorders and external challenges by Mons, Mongols, and Shans. Beginning in the early 13th century, the Shan began to encircle the Pagan Empire from the north and the east. The Mongols, who had conquered Yunnan, the former homeland of the Bamar, in 1253, began their invasion in 1277 in response to an embassy crisis, and in 1287 sacked Pagan, ending the Pagan Kingdom's 250-year rule of the Irrawaddy Valley and its periphery when the Pagan king of that time abandoned his palace on the news of the Mongol march. Pagan's rule of central Burma came to an end 10 years later in 1297 when it was toppled by the Myeongsang Kingdom of Shan rulers, small kingdoms. After the fall of Pagan, the Mongols left the searing Irrawaddy Valley, but the Pagan kingdom was irreparably broken up into several small kingdoms. By the mid-14th century, the country had become organized along four major power centers: Upper Burma, Lower Burma, Shan States, and Arakan. Many of the power centers were themselves made up of minor kingdoms or princely states. This era was marked by a series of wars and switching alliances. Smaller kingdoms played a precarious game of paying allegiance to more powerful states, sometimes simultaneously. Ava. Founded in 1364, Kingdom of Ava was the successor state to earlier, even smaller kingdoms based in central Burma: Toungoo, Myeongsang Pinya Kingdom, and Sagaing Kingdom. In its first years of existence, Ava, which viewed itself as the rightful successor to the Pagan Kingdom, tried to reassemble the former empire. While it was able to pull the Toungoo-ruled kingdom and peripheral Shan states into its fold at the peak of its power, it failed to reconquer the rest. The 40 Years' War with Hanthawaddy left Ava exhausted, and its power plateaued. Its kings regularly faced rebellions in its vassal regions but were able to put them down until the 1480s. In the late 15th century, the Prome Kingdom and its Shan states successfully broke away, and in the early 16th century, Ava itself came under attacks from its former vassals. In 1510, Toungoo also broke away. In 1527, the Confederation of Shan States led by Monyan captured Ava. The Confederation's rule of Upper Burma, though lasted until 1555, was marred by internal fighting between Monyan and Tibeto houses. The kingdom was toppled by Toungoo forces in 1555. The Burmese language and culture came into its own between the last period of the Pagan Kingdom and the Ava period. Hanthawaddy Kingdom. The Mon Kingdom was founded as Ramanadesa right after Pagan's collapse in 1297. In the beginning, the Lower Burma-based kingdom was a loose federation of regional power center in the Modama, the Pegu and the Irrawaddy Delta. The energetic reign of Irrawaddy cemented the kingdom's existence. Irrawaddy firmly unified the three Mon-speaking regions together, and successfully held off Ava in the 40 Years' War. After the war, Hanthawaddy entered its golden age, whereas its rival Ava gradually went into decline. From the 1420s to the 1530s, Hanthawaddy was the most powerful and prosperous kingdom of all post-Pagan kingdoms. Under a string of especially gifted monarchs, the kingdom enjoyed a long golden age, profiting from foreign commerce. The kingdom, with a flourishing the Mon language and culture, became a center of commerce and Theravada Buddhism. Due to the inexperience of its last ruler, the powerful kingdom was conquered by the upstart Toungoo dynasty in 1539. The kingdom was briefly revived between 1550 and 1552. It effectively controlled only Pegu and was crushed by Toungoo in 1552. Shan States. The Shans, ethnic Thai peoples who came down with the Mongols, stayed and quickly came to dominate much of northern to eastern arc of Burma, from northwestern Sagaing Division to Kachin Hills to the present-day Shan Hills. The most powerful Shan states were Monyan and Magong in present-day Kachin State, followed by Sinwi, Sipa and Momak in present-day northern Shan State. Minor states included Kali, Bamo, Kamphi Long, Hapong, Shatong, Samangkam, Sonsup, Shkip, Shisai, Ximangam, Kangcheng, Kangkam, Kanglan, Kangtong, Kangtung, Kokong, Kyaku Saiwan, Kiang, Lega, Loksok, Loi Ai, Loi Long, Loi Ma, Niang Shui and many more. Monyan, in particular, constantly raided Ava's territory in the early 16th century. The Monhain-led Confederation of Shan States, in alliance with Prome Kingdom, captured Ava itself in 1527. The Confederation defeated its erstwhile ally Prome in 1532, and ruled all of Upper Burma except Toungoo. But the Confederation was marred by internal bickering, and could not stop Toungoo, which conquered Ava in 1555 and all of the Shan states by 1563. Arakan. Although Arakan had been de facto independent since the late Pagan period, the long Pyay dynasty of Arakan was ineffectual. Until the founding of the Mrauk U Kingdom in 1429, Arakan was often caught between bigger neighbors, and found itself a battlefield during the 40 Years' War between Ava and Pagu. Mrauk U went on to be a powerful kingdom in its own right between 15th and 17th centuries, including East Bengal between 1459 and 1666. Arakan was the only post-Pagan kingdom not to be annexed by the Toungoo dynasty. Toungoo dynasty. First Toungoo Empire. Beginning in the 1480s, Ava faced constant internal rebellions and external attacks from the Shan States, and began to disintegrate. In 1510, Toungoo, located in the remote southeastern corner of the Ava Kingdom, also declared independence. When the Confederation of Shan States conquered Ava in 1527, many refugees fled southeast to Toungoo, the only kingdom in peace, and one surrounded by larger hostile kingdoms. Toungoo, led by its ambitious king Hanthawaddy and his deputy general Bayanong, would go on to reunify the petty kingdoms that had existed since the fall of the Pagan Empire, and found the largest empire in the history of Southeast Asia. First, the upstart kingdom defeated a more powerful Hanthawaddy in the Toungoo-Hanthawaddy War. Hanthawaddy moved the capital to newly captured Bago in 1539. Toungoo had expanded its authority up to Pagan by 1544 but failed to conquer Arakan in 1545-47 and Siam in 1547-49. Hanthawaddy's successor Bayanong continued the policy of expansion, conquering Ava in 1555, nearer/cis-Salween Shan States, Lan Na, Manipur, farther/trans-Salween Shan States, the Siam, and Lan Shang, and bringing much of western and central mainland Southeast Asia under his rule. Bayanong put in place a lasting administrative system that reduced the power of hereditary Shan chiefs, and brought Shan customs in line with lowland norms. But he could not replicate an effective administrative system everywhere in his far-flung empire. His empire was a loose collection of former sovereign kingdoms, whose kings were loyal to him as the Kakavati, not the Kingdom of Toungoo. The overextended empire unraveled soon after Bayanong's death in 1581. Siam broke away in 1584 and went to war with Burma until 1605. By 1597, the kingdom had lost all its possessions, including Toungoo, the ancestral home of the dynasty. In 1599, the Arakanese forces, aided by Portuguese mercenaries, and in alliance with the rebellious Toungoo forces, sacked Pagu. The country fell into chaos, with each region claiming a king. Portuguese mercenary Felipe de Brito e Nicket promptly rebelled against his Arakanese masters, and established Goa-backed Portuguese rule at Thanlien in 1603, restored Toungoo Kingdom. While the interregnum that followed the fall of Pagan Empire lasted over 250 years, that following the fall of First Toungoo was relatively short-lived. One of Bayanong's sons, Nyongyan Men, immediately began the reunification effort, successfully restoring central authority over Upper Burma and nearer Shan States by 1606. His successor Inhabitants defeated the Portuguese at Thanlien in 1613. He recovered the Upper Tanantharyi coast to Dawei and Lan Na from the Siamese by 1614. He also captured the Trans-Salween Shan States in 1622-26. His brother Thalan rebuilt the war-torn country. He ordered the first-ever census in Burmese history in 1635, which showed that the kingdom had about 2 million people. By 1650, the three able kings Nyongyan, Inhabitants, and Thalan had successfully rebuilt a smaller but far more manageable kingdom. More importantly, the new dynasty proceeded to create a legal and political system whose basic features would continue under the Konbaung dynasty well into the 19th century. The crown completely replaced the hereditary chieftainships with appointed governorships in the entire Irrawaddy Valley, and greatly reduced the hereditary rights of Shan chiefs. It also reigned in the continuous growth of monastic wealth and autonomy, giving a greater tax base. Its trade and secular administrative reforms built a prosperous economy for more than 80 years. Except for a few occasional rebellions and an external war, Burma defeated Siam's attempt to take Lan Na and Modama in 1662-64. The kingdom was largely at peace for the rest of the 17th century. The kingdom entered a gradual decline, and the authority of the palace kings deteriorated rapidly in the 1720s. From 1724 onwards, the Meitei people began raiding the upper Chindwin River. In 1727, southern Lan Na successfully revolted, leaving just northern Lan Na under an increasingly nominal Burmese rule. Meitei raids intensified in the 1730s, reaching increasingly deeper parts of central Burma. In 1740, the Mon in Lower Burma began a rebellion, and founded the restored Hanthawaddy Kingdom, and by 1745 controlled much of Lower Burma. The Siamese also moved their authority up the Tanantharyi coast by 1752. Hanthawaddy invaded Upper Burma in November 1751, and captured Ava on March 23, 1752, ending the 266-year-old Toungoo dynasty. Konbaung dynasty. Reunification. Soon after the fall of Ava, a new dynasty rose in Shwebo to challenge the authority of Hanthawaddy. Over the next 70 years, the highly militaristic Konbaung dynasty went on to create the largest Burmese empire, second only to the Empire of Bayanong. By 1759, King Alam Pyay's Konbaung forces had reunited all of Burma, extinguished the Mon-led Hanthawaddy dynasty once and for all, and driven out the European powers who provided arms to Hanthawaddy, the French from Thamlian and the English from Cape Negrais. Wars with Siam and China. The kingdom then went to war with the Irrawaddy Kingdom, which had occupied up the Tanantharyi coast to Motama during the Burmese Civil War, and had provided shelter to the Mon refugees. By 1767, the Konbaung armies had subdued much of Laos and defeated Siam. But they could not finish off the remaining Siamese resistance as they were forced to defend against 4 invasions by Qing China. While the Burmese defenses held in the most disastrous frontier war the Qing dynasty had ever waged, the Burmese were preoccupied with another impending invasion by the world's largest empire for years. The Qing kept a heavy military lineup in the border areas for about 1 decade in an attempt to wage another war while imposing a ban on inter-border trade for 2 decades. The Irrawaddy Kingdom used the Konbaung preoccupation with the Qing to recover their lost territories by 1770, and in addition, went on to capture much of Lan Na by 1776, ending over 2 centuries of Burmese suzerainty over the region. They went to war again in 1785 to 1786, 1787, 1792, 1803 to 1808, 1809 to 1812 and 1849 to 1855, but these all resulted in a stalemate. After decades of war, the 2 countries essentially exchanged Tanantharyi and Lan Na. Westward expansion and wars with British Empire. Faced with a powerful China in the northeast and a resurgent Siam in the southeast, King Bada Pyay turned westward for expansion. He conquered Arakan in 1785, annexed Manipur in 1814, and captured Assam in 1817 to 1819, leading to a long ill-defined border with British India. Bada Pyay's successor King Bagudal was left to put down British-instigated rebellions in Manipur in 1819 and Assam in 1821 to 1822. Cross-border raids by rebels from the British-protected territories and counter-cross-border raids by the Burmese led to the First Anglo-Burmese War, lasting 2 years and costing £13 million. The First Anglo-Burmese War was the longest and most expensive war in British Indian history, but ended in a decisive British victory. Burma ceded all of Bada Pyay's western acquisitions plus Tenasserim. Burma was crushed for years by repaying a large indemnity of £1 million. In 1852, the British unilaterally and easily seized the Pegu province in the Second Anglo-Burmese War. After the war, King Mindon tried to modernize the Burmese state and economy, and made trade and territorial concessions to stave off further British encroachments, including ceding the Karenni states to the British in 1875. Nonetheless, the British, alarmed by the consolidation of French Indochina, annexed the remainder of the country in the Third Anglo-Burmese War in 1885, and sent the last Burmese king Tibaw and his family to exile in India. Administrative and economic reforms. Konbaung kings extended administrative reforms first began in the restored Toungoo dynasty period, and achieved unprecedented levels of internal control and external expansion. Konbaung kings tightened control in the lowlands and reduced the hereditary privileges of Shan States. Konbaung officials, particularly after 1780, began commercial reforms that increased government income and rendered it more predictable. Money economy continued to gain ground. In 1857, the Crown inaugurated a full-fledged system of cash taxes and salaries, assisted by the country's first standardized silver coinage. Culture. Cultural integration continued. For the first time in history, the Burmese language and culture came to predominate the entire Irrawaddy Valley, with the Mon language and ethnicity completely eclipsed by 1830. The nearer Shan principalities adopted more lowland norms. The evolution and growth of Burmese literature and theatre continued, aided by an extremely high adult male literacy rate for the era. Monastic and lay elites around the Konbaung kings, particularly from Bada Pyay's reign, also launched a major reformation of Burmese intellectual life and monastic organization and practice known as the Sudhamma Reformation. It led to, amongst other things, Burma's first proper state histories. British rule. Britain made Burma a province of India in 1886 with the capital at Rangoon. Traditional Burmese society was drastically altered by the demise of the monarchy and the separation of religion and state. Though war officially ended after only a couple of weeks, resistance continued in northern Burma until 1890, with the British finally resorting to a systematic destruction of villages and appointment of new officials to finally halt all guerrilla activity. The economic nature of society also changed dramatically. After the opening of the Suez Canal, the demand for Burmese rice grew and vast tracts of land were opened up for cultivation. However, to prepare the new land for cultivation, farmers were forced to borrow money from Indian moneylenders called chettiars at high interest rates and were often foreclosed on and evicted, losing land and livestock. Most of the jobs also went to indentured Indian laborers, and whole villages became outlawed as they resorted to dacoity. While the Burmese economy grew, most of the power and wealth remained in the hands of several British firms, Anglo-Burmese people, and migrants from India. The civil service was largely staffed by the Anglo-Burmese community and Indians, and Bamars were largely excluded almost entirely from military service. By around the start of the 20th century, a nationalist movement began to take shape in the form of the Young Men's Buddhist Association, modeled on the YMCA, as religious associations were allowed by the colonial authorities. They were later superseded by the General Council of Burmese Associations, which was linked with Wunthanu Avan or national associations that sprang up in villages throughout Burma proper. Between 1900 to 1911, the Irish Buddhist Udamaloka challenged Christianity and British rule on religious grounds. A new generation of Burmese leaders arose in the early 20th century from amongst the educated classes that were permitted to go to London to study law. They came away from this experience with the belief that the Burmese situation could be improved through reform. Progressive constitutional reform in the early 1920s led to a legislature with limited powers, a university, and more autonomy for Burma within the administration of India. Efforts were also undertaken to increase the representation of Burmese in the civil service. Some people began to feel that the rate of change was not fast enough and the reforms not expansive enough. In 1920, the first university student strike in history broke out in protest against the new University Act, which the students believed would only benefit the elite and perpetuate colonial rule. National schools sprang up across the country in protest against the colonial education system, and the strike came to be commemorated as National Day. There were further strikes and anti-tax protests in the later 1920s led by the Wunthanu Athans. Prominent among the political activists were Buddhist monks, such as U Atama and Usainda and the Arakan, who subsequently led an armed rebellion against the British and later the Nationalist government after independence, and U Wasara, the first martyr of the movement to die after a protracted hunger strike in prison. In December 1930, a local tax protest by Saya San and Theravada quickly grew into first a regional and then a national insurrection against the government. Lasting for 2 years, the Galan Rebellion, named after the mythical Garuda, the enemy of the Nagas, emblazoned on the pennants the rebels carried, required thousands of British troops to suppress along with promises of further political reform. The eventual trial of Saya San, who was executed, allowed several future national leaders, including Bamar and Usa, who participated in his defense, to rise to prominence. May 1930 saw the founding of the Dobama Ajiwan, whose members called themselves the Keen. The second university student strike in 1936 was triggered by the expulsion of Aung San and Ko Nu, leaders of the Rangoon University Students' Union, for refusing to reveal the name of the author who had written an article in their university magazine, making a scathing attack on one of the senior university officials. It spread to Mandalay, leading to the formation of the All Burma Students' Union. Aung San and Nu subsequently joined the Thakeen movement, progressing from student to national politics. The British separated Burma from India in 1937 and granted the colony a new constitution calling for a fully elected assembly, but this proved to be a divisive issue as some Burmese felt that this was a ploy to exclude them from any further Indian reforms, whereas other Burmese saw any action that removed Burma from the control of India to be a positive step. Bamar served as the first Prime Minister of Burma, but he was succeeded by U Sa in 1939, who served as Prime Minister from 1940 until he was arrested on January 19, 1942 by the British for communicating with the Japanese. A wave of strikes and protests that started from the oil fields of central Burma in 1938 became a general strike with far-reaching consequences. In Rangoon, student protesters, after successfully picketing the Secretariat, the seat of the colonial government, were charged by mounted police from the Indian Imperial Police wielding batons, which killed a Rangoon University student called Ong Cho. In Mandalay, the colonial police shot into a crowd of protesters led by Buddhist monks, killing 17 people. The movement became known as Tongthanyabhai Daban, and 20th of December, the day the first martyr Ong Cho fell, commemorated by students as Bo Ong Cho Day. World War II. Some Burmese nationalists saw the outbreak of World War II as an opportunity to extort concessions from the British in exchange for support in the war effort. Other Burmese, such as the Thekin movement, opposed Burma's participation in the war under any circumstances. Aung San co-founded the Communist Party of Burma with other Thakins in August 1939. Marxist literature as well as tracts from the Sinn Féin movement in Ireland had been widely circulated and read among political activists. Aung San also co-founded the People's Revolutionary Party, renamed the Socialist Party after the World War II. He was also instrumental in founding the Freedom Bloc by forging an alliance of the Dobama, Absu, politically active monks and Ba Ma's Poor Man's Party. After the Dobama organization called for a national uprising, an arrest warrant was issued for many of the organization's leaders including Aung San, who escaped to China. Aung San's intention was to make contact with the Chinese communists, but he was detected by the Japanese authorities who offered him support by forming a secret intelligence unit called the Minami Kikan headed by Colonel Suzuki with the objective of closing the Burma Road and supporting a national uprising. Aung San briefly returned to Burma to enlist 29 young men who went to Japan with him to receive military training on Hainan Island, China, and they came to be known as the 30 Comrades. When the Japanese occupied Bangkok in December 1941, Aung San announced the formation of the Burma Independence Army in anticipation of the Japanese invasion of Burma in 1942. The BIA formed a provisional government in some areas of the country in the spring of 1942, but there were differences within the Japanese leadership over the future of Burma. While Colonel Suzuki encouraged the 30 Comrades to form a provisional government, the Japanese military leadership had never formally accepted such a plan. Eventually the Japanese army turned to Ba Ma to form a government. During the war in 1942, the BIA had grown in an uncontrolled manner, and in many districts officials and even criminals appointed themselves to the BIA. It was reorganized as the Burma Defense Army under the Japanese but still headed by Aung San. While the BIA had been an irregular force, the BDA was recruited by selection and trained as a conventional army by Japanese instructors. Ba Ma was afterwards declared head of state, and his cabinet included both Aung San as war minister and the communist leader Thekin Then Tun as minister of land and agriculture as well as the socialist leaders Thakins Nu and Maya. When the Japanese declared Burma, in theory, independent in 1943, the Burma Defense Army was renamed the Burma National Army. Joining the Allies. It soon became apparent that Japanese promises of independence were merely a sham and that Ba Ma was deceived. As the war turned against the Japanese, they declared Burma a fully sovereign state on August 1, 1943, but this was just another facade. Disillusioned, Aung San began negotiations with communist leaders Thekin Then Tun and Thekin Su, and socialist leaders Ba Sui and Cho Niang, which led to the formation of the anti-fascist organization in August 1944 at a secret meeting of the CPB, the PRP and the BNA in Pegu. The AFO was later renamed the Anti-Fascist People's Freedom League. Thekin Then Tun and Su, while in Insein prison in July 1941, had co-authored the Insein Manifesto which, against the prevailing opinion in the Dobama movement, identified world fascism as the main enemy in the coming war and called for temporary cooperation with the British and a broad Allied coalition which should include the Soviet Union. Su had already gone underground to organize resistance against the Japanese occupation, and then Tun was able to pass on Japanese intelligence to Su, while other communist leaders the Keen Thine P and Tin Shui made contact with the exiled colonial government in Simla, India. There were informal contacts between the AFO and the Allies in 1944 and 1945 through the British Organisation Force 136. On March 27, 1945, the Burma National Army rose up in a countrywide rebellion against the Japanese. 27th of March had been celebrated as Resistance Day until the military renamed it Tatmadaw Day. Aung San and others subsequently began negotiations with Lord Mountbatten and officially joined the Allies as the Patriotic Burmese Forces. At the first meeting, the AFO represented itself to the British as the Provisional Government of Burma with the Keen Su as chairman and an Aung San as a member of its ruling committee. The Japanese were routed from most of Burma by May 1945. Negotiations then began with the British over the disarming of the AFO and the participation of its troops in a post-war Burma army. Some veterans had been formed into a paramilitary force under Aung San, called the Pyathu Yeba Tat or People's Volunteer Organization, and were openly drilling in uniform. The absorption of the PDF was concluded successfully at the Kandy Conference in Ceylon in September 1945. Under Japanese occupation, 170,000 to 250,000 civilians died. Following World War II, the surrender of the Japanese brought a military administration to Burma and demands to try Aung San for his involvement in a murder during military operations in 1942. Lord Mountbatten realized that this was an impossibility considering Aung San's popular appeal. After the war ended, the British governor, Sir Reginald Dorman Smith, returned. The restored government established a political program that focused on physical reconstruction of the country and delayed discussion of independence. The AFO opposed the government, leading to political instability in the country. A rift had also developed in the AFO between the communists and Aung San together with the socialists over strategy, which led to then Tun being forced to resign as General Secretary in July 1946 and the expulsion of the CPB from the AFO the following October. Dorman Smith was replaced by Sir Hubert Rance as the new governor, and almost immediately after his appointment the Rangoon police went on strike. The strike, starting in September 1946, then spread from the police to government employees and came close to becoming a general strike. Rance calmed the situation by meeting with Aung San and convincing him to join the governor's executive council along with other members of the AFO. The new executive council, which now had increased credibility in the country, began negotiations for Burmese independence, which were concluded successfully in London as the Aung San-Attlee Agreement on January 27, 1947. The agreement left parts of the communist and conservative branches of the AFO dissatisfied, however, sending the Red Flag communists led by the Keen Su underground and the conservatives into opposition. Aung San also succeeded in concluding an agreement with ethnic minorities for a unified Burma at the Panglong Conference on 12 February, celebrated since as Union Day. Aung San Wei, U Kin, Myoma Yuthan Kai Wei, Major Aung, Sir Maung Gi and Dr. Zain Myamong were most important negotiators and leaders of the historical Pinland Conference negotiated with Burma national top leader General Aung San and other top leaders in 1947. All these leaders decided to join together to form the Union of Burma. Union Day celebration is one of the greatest in the history of Burma. The popularity of the AFO, now dominated by Aung San and the Socialists, was eventually confirmed when it won an overwhelming victory in the April 1947 Constituent Assembly elections. On July 19, 1947, U Sa, a conservative pre-war Prime Minister of Burma, engineered the assassination of Aung San and several members of his cabinet including his eldest brother Ba Win, while meeting in the Secretariat. 19th of July has been commemorated since as Martyrs' Day. Shortly after, rebellion broke out in the Arakan led by the veteran monk Usenda, and it began to spread to other districts. The Keen Nu, the socialist leader, was now asked to form a new cabinet, and he presided over Burmese independence which was established under the Burma Independence Act 1947 on January 4, 1948. The popular sentiment to part with the British was so strong at the time that Burma opted not to join the Commonwealth of Nations, unlike India or Pakistan. Independent Burma. 1948–62 The first years of Burmese independence were marked by successive insurgencies by the Red Flag communists led by the Keen Su, the White Flag communists led by the Keen Then Tun, the Yebog Bu led by Bo La Yong, a member of the 30 Comrades, army rebels calling themselves the Revolutionary Burma Army led by communist officers Bo Zaya, Bo Yan Ong and Bo Yi Chit, all three of them members of the 30 Comrades, Arakanese Muslims or the Mujahid, and the Karen National Union. After the communist victory in China in 1949, remote areas of northern Burma were for many years controlled by an army of Kuomintang forces under the command of General Li Mi. Burma accepted foreign assistance in rebuilding the country in these early years, but continued American support for the Chinese nationalist military presence in Burma finally resulted in the country rejecting most foreign aid, refusing to join the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and supporting the Bandung Conference of 1955. Burma generally strove to be impartial in world affairs, and was one of the first countries in the world to recognize Israel and the People's Republic of China. By 1958, the country was beginning to recover economically, but was beginning to fall apart politically due to a split in the AFPL into two factions. One faction was led by Thakins Nu and Tin, and the other was led by Ba Sui and Cho Niang. And this was despite the unexpected success of U Nu's Arms for Democracy offer taken up by Usenda and the Arakan, the PAO, some Mon and Shan groups, but more significantly by the PDO surrendering their arms. The situation, however, became very unstable in parliament, with U Nu surviving a no-confidence vote only with the support of the opposition National United Front, believed to have crypto-communists amongst them. Army hardliners now saw the threat of the CPB coming to an agreement with U Nu through the NUF, and in the end U Nu invited Army Chief of Staff General Ne Win to take over the country. Over 400 communist sympathizers were arrested, of which 153 were deported to the Coco Island in the Andaman Sea. Among them was the NUF leader Aung Than, older brother of Aung San. The Bata Tong, Yemen and Rangoon daily newspapers were also closed down. Ne Win's caretaker government successfully established the situation and paved the way for new general elections in 1960 that returned U Nu's Union Party with a large majority. The situation did not remain stable for long, when the Shan federal movement, started by Nyong Shui Sabwa Sao Shui Thik and aspiring to a loose federation, was seen as a separatist movement insisting on the government honoring the right to secession and 10 years provided for by the 1947 Constitution. Ne Win had already succeeded in stripping the Shan Sabwas of their feudal powers in exchange for comfortable pensions for life in 1959. 1962–88 On March 2, 1962, Ne Win, with 16 other senior military officers, staged a coup d'état, arrested U Nu, Sao Shui Thik and several others, and declared a socialist state to be run by their Union Revolutionary Council. Sao Shui Thik's son, Sao Mia Thik, was shot dead in what was generally described as a bloodless coup. Tiba Sabwa Sao Kia Sang also disappeared mysteriously after being stopped at a checkpoint near Tongji. A number of protests followed the coup, and initially the military's response was mild. However, on July 7, 1962, a peaceful student protest on Rangoon University campus was suppressed by the military, killing over 100 students. The next day, the army blew up the Students' Union building. Talks were convened between the RC and various armed insurgent groups in 1963, but without any breakthrough, and during the talks as well as in the aftermath of their failure, hundreds were arrested in Rangoon and elsewhere from both the right and the left of the political spectrum. All opposition parties were banned on March 28, 1964. The Kachin insurgency by the Kachin Independence Organization had begun earlier in 1961, triggered by U Nu's declaration of Buddhism as the state religion, and the Shan State Army, led by Sao Shui Thik's wife Mahadavi and son Zhaozong Yoan Wei, launched a rebellion in 1964 as a direct consequence of the 1962 military coup. Ne Win quickly took steps to transform Burma into his vision of a socialist state and to isolate the country from contact with the rest of the world. A one-party system was established with his newly formed Burma Socialist Program Party in complete control. Commerce and industry were nationalized across the board, but the economy did not grow at first if at all, as the government put too much emphasis on industrial development at the expense of agriculture. In April 1972, General Ne Win and the rest of the Union Revolutionary Council retired from the military, but now as U Ne Win, he continued to run the country through the BSPP. A new constitution was promulgated in January 1974 that resulted in the creation of a People's Assembly that held supreme legislative, executive, and judicial authority, and local people's councils. Ne Win became the president of the new government. Beginning in May 1974, a wave of strikes hit Rangoon and elsewhere in the country against a backdrop of corruption, inflation and food shortages, especially rice. In Rangoon, workers were arrested at the Insein railway yard, and troops opened fire on workers at the Thamining textile mill and Similayak dockyard. In December 1974, the biggest anti-government demonstrations to date broke out over the funeral of former UN Secretary-General U Thant. U Thant had been former Prime Minister U Nu's closest advisor in the 1950s and was seen as a symbol of opposition to the military regime. The Burmese people felt that U Thant was denied a state funeral that he deserved as a statesman of international stature because of his association with U Nu. On March 23, 1976, over 100 students were arrested for holding a peaceful ceremony to mark the centenary of the birth of the king Konbaung, who was the greatest Burmese poet and writer and nationalist leader of the 20th century history of Burma. He had inspired a whole generation of Burmese nationalists and writers by his work, mainly written in verse, fostering immense pride in their history, language and culture, and urging them to take direct action such as strikes by students and workers. It was Meng, as leader of the mainstream Dobama organization, who sent the 30 comrades abroad for military training, which became the origin of modern Myanmar army, and after independence devoted his life to internal peace and national reconciliation until he died at the age of 88 in 1964. Meng lies buried in a mausoleum at the foot of the Shwedagon Pagoda. A young staff officer called Captain On Cho Mint conspired with a few fellow officers in 1976 to assassinate Ni Win and San Yu, but the plot was uncovered and the officer tried and hanged. In 1978, a military operation was conducted against the Rohingya Muslims in Arakan, called the King Dragon Operation, causing 250,000 refugees to flee to neighboring Bangladesh. U Nu, after his release from prison in October 1966, had left Burma in April 1969, and formed the Parliamentary Democracy Party the following August in Bangkok, Thailand, with the former 30 comrades, Bo Letya, co-founder of the CPB and former Minister of Defense and Deputy Prime Minister, Bo Yan Nine, and U Thwin, ex-BIA and former Minister of Trade. Another member of the 30 comrades, Ba Mu Ong, former Minister of Defense, joined later. The fourth, Bo Setkya, who had gone underground after the 1962 coup, died in Bangkok shortly before U Nu arrived. The PDP launched an armed rebellion across the Thai border from 1972 till 1978 when Bo Letya was killed in an attack by the Karen National Union. U Nu, Ba Mu Ong and Bo Yan Nine returned to Rangoon after the 1980 amnesty. Ni Win also secretly held peace talks later in 1980 with the KIO and the CPB, again ending in a deadlock as before. Crisis and 1988 uprising. Ni Win retired as president in 1981, but remained in power as chairman of the BSPP until his sudden unexpected announcement to step down on July 23, 1988. In the 1980s, the economy began to grow as the government relaxed restrictions on foreign aid, but by the late 1980s falling commodity prices and rising debt led to an economic crisis. This led to economic reforms in 1987 to 1988 that relaxed socialist controls and encouraged foreign investment. This was not enough, however, to stop growing turmoil in the country, compounded by periodic demonetization of certain bank notes and the currency, the last of which was decreed in September 1987, wiping out the savings of the vast majority of people. In September 1987, Burma's de facto ruler U Ni Win suddenly cancelled certain currency notes, which caused a great downturn in the economy. The main reason for the cancellation of these notes was superstition on U Ni Win's part, as he considered the number 9 his lucky number. He only allowed 45 and 90 kyat notes, because these were divisible by 9. Burma's admittance to least developed country status by the UN the following December highlighted its economic bankruptcy. Triggered by brutal police repression of student-led protests causing the death of over 100 students and civilians in March and June 1988, widespread protests and demonstrations broke out on 8 August throughout the country. The military responded by firing into the crowds, alleging communist infiltration. Violence, chaos and anarchy reigned. Civil administration had ceased to exist, and by September of that year, the country was on the verge of a revolution. The armed forces, under the nominal command of General Saw Mong, staged a coup on 8 August to restore order. During the 8,888 uprising, as it became known, the military killed thousands. The military swept aside the Constitution of 1974 in favor of martial law under the State Law and Order Restoration Council with Saw Maung as chairman and prime minister. At a special 6-hour press conference on August 5, 1989, Brigadier General Kin Nyunt, the SLORC Secretary 1, and Chief of Military Intelligence Service, claimed that the uprising had been orchestrated by the Communist Party of Burma through its underground organization. Although there had inevitably been some underground CPB presence as well as that of ethnic insurgent groups, there was no evidence of their being in charge to any extent. In fact, in March 1989, the CPB leadership was overthrown by a rebellion by the Konbaung and Wa troops that it had come to depend on after losing its former strongholds in central Burma and re-establishing bases in the northeast in the late 1960s. The communist leaders were soon forced into exile across the Chinese border. 1990 to 2006. The military government announced a change of name for the country in English from Burma to Myanmar in 1989. It also continued the economic reforms started by the old regime and called for a constituent assembly to revise the 1974 constitution. This led to multi-party elections in May 1990 in which the National League for Democracy won a landslide victory over the National Unity Party and about a dozen smaller parties. The military would not let the assembly convene, and continued to hold the two leaders of the NLD, Toungoo and Aung San Suu Kyi, daughter of Aung San, under the house arrest imposed on them the previous year. Burma came under increasing international pressure to convene the elected assembly, particularly after Aung San Suu Kyi was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991, and also faced economic sanctions. In April 1992 the military replaced Saw Maung with General Then Shui. Then Shui released Toungoo from prison and relaxed some of the restrictions on Aung San Suu Kyi's house arrest, finally releasing her in 1995, although she was forbidden to leave Rangoon. Then Shui also finally allowed a national convention to meet in January 1993, but insisted that the assembly preserve a major role for the military in any future government, and suspended the convention from time to time. The NLD, fed up with the interference, walked out in late 1995, and the assembly was finally dismissed in March 1996 without producing a constitution. During the 1990s, the military regime had also had to deal with several insurgencies by tribal minorities along its borders. General Kin Nyunt was able to negotiate ceasefire agreements that ended the fighting with the Konbaung, hill tribes such as the Wa, and the Kachin, but the Karen would not negotiate. The military finally captured the main Karen base at Mainerpla in spring 1995, but there has still been no final peace settlement. Khun Sa, a major opium warlord who nominally controlled parts of Shan State, made a deal with the government in December 1995 after U.S. pressure. After the failure of the National Convention to create a new constitution, tensions between the government and the NLD mounted, resulting in two major crackdowns on the NLD in 1996 and 1997. The SLORC was abolished in November 1997 and replaced by the State Peace and Development Council, but it was merely a cosmetic change. Continuing reports of human rights violations in Burma led the United States to intensify sanctions in 1997, and the European Union followed suit in 2000. The military placed Aung San Suu Kyi under house arrest again in September 2000 until May 2002, when her travel restrictions outside of Rangoon were also lifted. Reconciliation talks were held with the government, but these came to a stalemate and Suu Kyi was once again taken into custody in May 2003 after an ambush on her motorcade reportedly by a pro-military mob. The government also carried out another large-scale crackdown on the NLD, arresting many of its leaders and closing down most of its offices. The situation in Burma remains tense to this day. August 2003, Kin Nyunt announced a 7-step roadmap to democracy, which the government claims it is in the process of implementing. There is no timetable associated with the government's plan, or any conditionality or independent mechanism for verifying that it is moving forward. For these reasons, most Western governments and Burma's neighbors have been skeptical and critical of the roadmap. On February 17, 2005, the government reconvened the National Convention, for the first time since 1993, in an attempt to rewrite the constitution. However, major pro-democracy organizations and parties, including the National League for Democracy, were barred from participating, the military allowing only selected smaller parties. It was adjourned once again in January 2006. In November 2005, the military junta started moving the government away from Yangon to an unnamed location near Kyotpay just outside Pyay, to a newly designated capital city. This public action follows a long-term unofficial policy of moving critical military and government infrastructure away from Yangon to avoid a repetition of the events of 1988. On Armed Forces Day, the capital was officially named Naypyidaw Myo-daw. In 2005, the capital city was relocated from Yangon to Naypyidaw. In November 2006, the International Labour Organization announced it will be seeking, at the International Court of Justice, to prosecute members of the ruling Myanmar junta for crimes against humanity over the continuous forced labor of its citizens by the military. According to the ILO, an estimated 800,000 people are subject to forced labor in Myanmar. 2007 Anti-government protests. The 2007 Burmese anti-government protests were a series of anti-government protests that started in Burma on August 15, 2007. The immediate cause of the protests was mainly the unannounced decision of the ruling junta, the State Peace and Development Council, to remove fuel subsidies, which caused the price of diesel and petrol to suddenly rise as much as 100%, and the price of compressed natural gas for buses to increase fivefold in less than a week. The protest demonstrations were at first dealt with quickly and harshly by the junta, with dozens of protesters arrested and detained. Starting 18th of September, the protests had been led by thousands of Buddhist monks, and those protests had been allowed to proceed until a renewed government crackdown on 26th of September. During the crackdown, there were rumors of disagreement within the Burmese military, but none were confirmed. At the time, independent sources reported, through pictures and accounts, 30 to 40 monks and 50 to 70 civilians killed as well as 200 beaten. However, other sources reveal more dramatic figures. In a White House statement, President Bush said, "Monks have been beaten and killed, thousands of pro-democracy protesters have been arrested." Some news reports referred to the protests as the Saffron Revolution. On February 7, 2008, SPDC announced that a referendum for the constitution would be held, and elections by 2010. The 2008 Burmese constitutional referendum was held on 10 May and promised a disciplined, flourishing democracy for the country in the future. Cyclone Nargis. On May 3, 2008, Cyclone Nargis devastated the country when winds of up to 215 km per hour touched land in the densely populated, rice farming delta of the Irrawaddy division. It is estimated that more than 130,000 people died or went missing and damage totaled $10 billion. It was the worst natural disaster in Burmese history. The World Food Programme reported that some villages have been almost totally eradicated and vast rice-growing areas are wiped out. The United Nations estimated that as many as 1 million were left homeless, and the World Health Organization received reports of malaria outbreaks in the worst affected area. Yet in the critical days following this disaster, Burma's isolationist regime complicated recovery efforts by delaying the entry of United Nations planes delivering medicine, food, and other supplies. The government's failure to permit entry for large-scale international relief efforts was described by the United Nations as unprecedented. 2011 to 2016. The 2011 to 2012 Burmese democratic reforms were an ongoing series of political, economic and administrative changes in Burma undertaken by the military-backed government. These reforms included the release of pro-democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi from house arrest and subsequent dialogues with her, establishment of the National Human Rights Commission, general amnesties of more than 200 political prisoners, institution of new labor laws that allow labor unions and strikes, relaxation of press censorship, and regulations of currency practices. As a consequence of the reforms, ASEAN approved Burma's bid for the chairmanship in 2014. United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited Burma on December 1, 2011, to encourage further progress. It was the first visit by a U.S. Secretary of State in more than 50 years. United States President Barack Obama visited 1 year later, becoming the first U.S. president to visit the country. Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy, participated in by-elections held on April 1, 2012 after the government abolished laws that led to the NLD's boycott of the 2010 general election. She led the NLD in winning the by-elections in a landslide, winning 41 out of 44 of the contested seats, with Suu Kyi herself winning a seat representing Konbaung constituency in the lower house of the Burmese parliament. 2015 election results gave the National League for Democracy an absolute majority of seats in both chambers of the Burmese parliament, enough to ensure that its candidate would become president, while NLD leader Aung San Suu Kyi is constitutionally barred from the presidency. However, clashes between Burmese troops and local insurgent groups continued. 2016 to 2021. The new parliament convened on February 1, 2016 and, on March 15, 2016, Tin Cho was elected as the first non-military president of the country since the military coup of 1962. Aung San Suu Kyi assumed the newly created role of the state councillor, a position similar to prime minister, on April 6, 2016. The resounding victory of Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy in 2015 general elections has raised hope for a successful transition of Myanmar from a closely held military rule to a free democratic system. However, internal political turmoil, crumbling economy and ethnic strife continue to make the transition to democracy a painful one. The 2017 murder of Ko Ni, a prominent Muslim lawyer and a key member of Myanmar's governing National League for Democracy party, is seen as a serious blow to the country's fragile democracy. Mr. Ko Ni's murder deprived Aung San Suu Kyi of his perspective as an advisor, particularly on reforming Myanmar's military-drafted constitution and ushering the country to democracy. There was a military crackdown against Rohingya that occurred from October 2016 to January 2017, and the second has been occurring since August 2017. The crisis forced over 1 million Rohingya to flee to other countries. Most fled to Bangladesh, resulting in the creation of Kutupalong refugee camp, the world's largest refugee camp. At the general election on November 8, 2020, the National League for Democracy won 396 out of 476 seats in parliament, an even larger margin of victory than in the 2015 election. The military's proxy party, the Union Solidarity and Development Party, won only 33 seats. 2021 present. On February 1, 2021, Myanmar's military, the Tatmadaw, detained the state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and other government members. The military handed power to the military chief Min Aung Hlaing, and a state of emergency has been declared for 1 year. On February 2, 2021, healthcare workers and civil servants across the country, including in the national capital, Naypyidaw, launched a national civil disobedience movement, in opposition to the coup d'etat. Protesters have employed peaceful and non-violent forms of protest, which include acts of civil disobedience, labor strikes, a military boycott campaign, a pot-banging movement, a red ribbon campaign, public protests, and formal recognition of the election results by elected representatives. On 20th of February, 2 people were shot dead and at least 2 dozens more were injured in Mandalay by the military and violent crackdown. These people were residents of Mahaong Myay Township, guarding government shipyard workers involved in the civil disobedience movement from the police who were forcing them back to work. In addition to firing live rounds, the police and military personnel also beat, arrested, used water cannon, and threw various objects such as marbles and stones at civilians. As of March 26, 2021, at least 3,070 people have been detained, and at least 423 protesters have been killed by military or police force.